Do that. I want to close this today with a story, my favorite story. Somebody asked me last night, what is your favorite story about Walter Cronkite? And this is the one that I told at Walter's funeral. And it helps you to understand how I feel about Walter. The year was 1976. I was the White House correspondent. President Ford was president, our first unelected president. He was running trying to win the office in his own right against Jimmy Carter. The election was the biggest story of the year, and as the other big story was the flu shot. The government had just developed these flu vaccines, and they were not working too well. So those were the big stories we were concerned with. As we went one day, the White House press corps, with President Ford up to New York, where he was being interviewed by Barbara Walters. He was being interviewed that afternoon. She was going to run the interview the next morning on the Today Show. And Barbara could make you believe it when she said something like this. Barbara said anyone who interviewed the president before her interview aired the next morning would be killed. And as I say, Barbara had a way of making people believe that. So here we were, being reporters, we immediately began trying to figure out a way to bust Barbara's exclusive. So I went to the White House press secretary. I said, could we? No, he said, it's out of the question. We've given Barbara our word that we won't do this. So I went next to the White House chief of staff, 32 years old. I called him Dick in those days. I would later come to call him Mr. Vice President, Dick Cheney. And I said, Dick, this is really putting us in a bind. Is there any way? He said, no, Bob, I'm sorry, we've given Barbara our word. We're not going to let the president be interviewed by anybody else. Well, then, to make matters even worse, I get this call from New York, and who is it? Walter Cronkite. Bob, he said, I understand the president is going to be up at Yonkers a little later today. Is there any way I could get up there? And I said, well, of course, Walter. What was I going to say? No, you stay there in Washington, in New York. I said, yes, Walter, we'd be glad to see. And Bob, would you see if I could get just a brief interview with the president? I said, well, Walter, that's going to be kind of hard. I don't know if I can, but I said, let me get to work. So I go back to Dick Cheney, and I say, Dick, now Walter's coming up here. Now he wants to interview the president. He said, Bob, we can't do that. We gave our word to Walter. And I said, well, Dick, let me ask you this. Do you think you could just sort of let Walter sneak in the back door and just shake hands with the president? I said, I know the president likes him, and it'd be a thrill for Walter. He said, well, I guess we could do that. And I said, you don't mind, do you, if I bring a camera crew in there just to record that? And he said, Bob, I'm just telling you, he's not going to do any interview. And I said, I understand completely. So at the appointed hour, Walter arrived, and the camera crew was there, and there was a sound man, and Walter took the microphone from the sound man, and he put the microphone in his left hand, and when they opened the door, we walked in, he walked right up to the president and said, hello, Mr. President, are you going to take your flu shot? And of course, Ford knew exactly what was going on, and he almost burst out laughing, and he said, well, Walter, he said, as a matter of fact, I am. He said, this is a good thing, and I think people ought to do it, and I think I should set the example. Well, I want to tell you that evening, 6:30, the CBS Evening News went on, and it went just like this. Good evening. President Ford told me in an exclusive interview on the campaign trail today that he would take his flu shot. And then we proceeded to run that entire interview, all 9 seconds of it. And I want to tell you, from that day forward, Walter Cronkite, nobody loved a scoop more than Walter Cronkite, especially when it was his own scoop, and especially when he had scooped Barbara Walters. Walter never forgot that. And he took care of me from that day forward. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you all.